If it's Thursday, human beings being used as political pawns in the political fight over border security. Florida's governor, which does not touch the border, sends 2 plane loads of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, as the Texas governor sends buses to drop off migrants at the doorsteps of the vice president's house. Plus, Presidents Putin and Xi face-to-face for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine, with Russian troops still stunned from Ukraine's counteroffensive. The high-stakes reunion and what it means for the war in Russia ahead. And Theocracy Rising, the future of Christian nationalism, and how one Idaho community became the latest flashpoint in the battle between church and state. Happy Thursday and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. There is perhaps no issue that better exemplifies the dysfunction in American politics than immigration and the border. Democrats and Republicans know our border policy and immigration policy badly need of an overhaul. But the political will to move forward, it's not there. And instead of solutions, politicians, particularly those on the right, are turning to stunts, impacting real human beings. Florida Republican Governor Ron Desantis sent 2 planes of migrants to the island of Martha's Vineyard yesterday, funded by taxpayer dollars in the state of Florida. It's part of an effort to, in the words of his spokesperson, to, quote, transport illegal immigrants to sanctuary destinations. According to the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, these 50 migrants are mainly from Venezuela. They're being sheltered by local aid groups. Desantis commented himself on his action this afternoon.
We take what's happening at the southern border very seriously, unlike some, and unlike the President of the United States, who has refused to lift a finger to secure that border. If you have folks that are inclined to think Florida is a good place, our message to them is we are not a sanctuary state, and it's better to be able to go to a sanctuary jurisdiction. And yes, we will help facilitate that transport for you to be able to go to greener pastures.
We'll fact check him on that, because actually the state of Florida, at least his administration, when it comes to Cubans, is apparently a sanctuary state. Now, there was a similar move this morning. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott sent migrants outside to Washington, D.C., specifically outside the vice president's residence here in Washington, D.C. Governor Abbott has bused more than 9,000 people to Washington, D.C. in recent weeks, and at least 1,000 to New York. He normally sends them to this building where I'm broadcasting from, because it's where Fox News's camera crews are, and they will alert the Fox News camera crew. They do not want to alert other news organizations of this for whatever reason. Now, today's actions by Abbott clearly seemed like an act of political trolling of the vice president after she made these comments to me about the state of the border on Sunday's Meet the Press.
The border is secure, but we also have a broken immigration system, in particular over the last 4 years before we came in, and it needs to be fixed.
We're going to have 2 million people cross this border for the first time ever. You're confident this border is secure?
We have a secure border in that is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration. But there are still a lot of problems that we are trying to fix, given the deterioration that happened over the last 4 years.
To be sure, yes, you can spread some blame around on this issue. Big cities like New York and D.C. arguably do have more infrastructure to handle an influx of migrants. But we're in this situation in immigration because our entire governing structure has zero appetite to reach a solution. Democrats do have policy prescriptions, but right now they aren't willing to put them in front of voters right now, simply because we're 54 days before an election. And it's an election that they want to make all about abortion access, not border security. Republicans, meanwhile, they don't want to consider action that would alleviate the problem, because they think the issue of border security helps fire up their base, and polling seems to prove this. These recent stunts from Desantis and Abbott, there never have been about serious solutions, attempts to find a solution to the very real problem. Neither one of them have ever actually offered up an actual solution to the border problem. What they are is an attempt to get national attention, negative reaction from much of the media, and of course, you'll see the fundraising emails tonight, based on what members of the media or politicians said about their actions. So it's a fundraising ploy. And it's all due to treating people as political pawns, leaving some migrants who might have been misled to believe they were going elsewhere, as reported by NPR, on a literal island that doesn't have any infrastructure designed to help them at all. In a word, it's inhumane. Bottom line, a grand bargain on immigration has eluded politicians for nearly a generation because of politics, pure and simple. And when neither party has the will to get things done, we're left with a broken system and politicians like Ron Desantis deciding to govern by cruel memes. And right now, he thinks he's being rewarded for it. I'm joined now by two of my NBC News colleagues who report on two sides of this story very closely. Our Homeland Security correspondent, Julia Ainsley, our senior national political reporter, Mark Caputo, who basically owns the Florida beat for us. But Julia, let me start with the current situation. How did these migrants, how did the governor of Florida order migrants in Texas to land in the state of Massachusetts?
Yeah, exactly. It seems like he definitely would have had to have some coordination with Texan Governor Abbott, and that seems very likely in this case. They also came through Lackland Air Force Base, we understand, right outside of San Antonio. So begs the question, was the federal government not alerted if they're able to use an Air Force base to transport these people? And it also definitely makes a well-deserved fact check for what the Governor Desantis said right there, saying that this is not a sanctuary state, when in fact we know many Cubans can come there, do stay, as you pointed out, obviously for political reasons, and that he's not actually taking migrants out of the state of Florida in the first place. They're out of the state of Texas. We understand from Lackland Air Force Base, they did go to Florida, then to Charlotte, North Carolina, then all the way up to Martha's Vineyard, a long journey. And some of them might have been deceived. Some may have thought they were going to a different place, as NPR reported. We also understand from attorneys who have talked to these migrants on the ground, that they thought they were going to a place where they could get a job, that this would be the place for them. Of course, it's very hard to be going in to a tourist destination at the end of a tourist season.
What's the status that Venezuelans have right now in America? Because there's been some, do they have temporary protected status or not?
Well, not for those who have recently entered. That's not the way temporary protected status works. It sets a date and time and says anyone who's here now can have it. The thing is, though, Venezuelans are not what they call amenable to Title 42, meaning they cannot use those COVID-19 restrictions to push Venezuelans back into Mexico. Mexico won't.
So that's
take
why they
them.
weren't sent out of the country.
Exactly.
He chose not to send them out of the country because they're Venezuelan.
Right, because and Mexico won't take them back because they can't be deported to Venezuela. So there are certain nationalities, Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians in large part, and Nicaraguans too, that simply can't be pushed back. They stay in the country, and it's even more of a draw for them to come. Also keep in mind, they're escaping desperate situations in Venezuela.
Mark Caputo, I want to get to the Florida side of this. First of all, there's a question about whether the governor followed the law he got passed, which gave him the financial ability to pay for these flights because it was supposed to take illegal immigrants out of the state of Florida. Now, I guess this plane technically touched down in Florida, and perhaps that's their fig leaf here, but is it clear that he followed the law?
Well, the budget proviso, as it were, the budget language specifically says they're using COVID relief money for this program, by the way. It's $12 million total budget.
The interest on COVID relief money, I believe, technically, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it is migrants, I think it's unauthorized aliens is the exact phrase, from this state. So, yes, it looks like DeSantis might have imported unauthorized aliens, to use the term in the budget, in order to then export them to Martha's Vineyard. His team is not making much secret of this, at least privately. Yeah, they totally admit this is a troll. He's going to troll his way possibly to the White House if Trump doesn't run, because this is the stuff that makes Republican hearts go pitter-patter. But the reality is DeSantis was in Congress when the bipartisan immigration bill passed the Senate and died in the House, and he didn't do anything about that. So he did have an opportunity to weigh in on immigration in Congress and didn't take that opportunity.
Mark, let me ask you this. Walk me through, you were on top of this when it happened. His lieutenant governor, Jeanette Nunez, had said, we're shipping anybody out, including Cubans. And then all of a sudden, there was an uproar. And I believe the governor there spoke incorrectly about Florida's not a sanctuary state. Well, I guess it depends on your perspective. If you're a Cuban, it is.
Well, it's technically they're following the Cuban Adjustment Act. So if you're Cuban and your foot hits U.S. soil, you can plead asylum and more easily get in the country. So, yeah, de facto, Miami has been a sanctuary city for Cuban migrants and really migrants from around Latin America, especially Venezuela, Nicaragua, and the like. The sentiment has changed, though. Donald Trump won a very large share of Latino communities' votes, including Venezuelans, even though he did nothing about TPS, which we just spoke about a second ago. Joe Biden actually did. But if you talk to people in the Venezuelan community, in the Cuban community, Honduran, Nicaraguan, you'll actually hear them say, look, there are a lot of their fellow Honduran, Cuban, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan, Colombian American neighbors who, once they got their TPS, their green cards, their citizenship, became far less interested in their fellow man getting it as well. So it's been a history of immigrant communities in the United States.
Sure. Once
you get here to draw up the bridge. And that exists in the Venezuelan community here as well as the others.
Look, I remember this during the so-called Marielito boat lift, and there were Cubans versus Cubans on that down in South Florida. But is there any political risk here by him being so? I mean, again, this is a guy who rails against socialism. These are people fleeing socialism, pure and simple. Are we no longer going to be a sanctuary for those fleeing socialism?
Good question. We'll have to see. There's no estimate about the number of Venezuelan voters. There's 14 million registered voters in Florida. Probably the best unofficial estimate is 50 to 60,000 Venezuelans. But, Juan Escalante, who's an immigration rights advocate, has TPS as Venezuelan. He had coined the term Magazuelans to describe that aspect or that group of Venezuelans in the Miami community who are firmly in the Donald Trump and Desantis camp. I'm not sure what sort of risk it has. This is how politics unfolds. Let's see what Charlie Crist, his Democratic opponent, does with it.
Well, that will be fascinating to watch on that front. Very quickly, Julia, I want to bring up one point that Governor Desantis made in that same press conference. We played a clip from it. He said, this is no different than when the federal government takes migrants and spreads them around the country. What say you?
That is different.
Okay.
That is because when the federal government takes migrants, they're moving them to places like detention centers. It's coordinated. If they're moving them to another city, the migrant has paid or their family has paid for their transportation because they're often, most of the people who come here have family in the United States. They're going to stay with relatives and sponsors until their immigration dates. So this is very different, especially with the fact that they are not coordinating with these cities and states so that they're purposely caught by surprise in a chaotic situation without anyone to care for them.
A perfect transition for my next guest. Julia and Mark, thank you both for your reporting. And joining me now is Massachusetts State Representative Dylan Fernandez. Dylan Fernandez represents Martha's Vineyard as well as Nantucket and parts of Cape Cod in his state House district there. And Representative Fernandez joins me now. Really appreciate you giving me a few minutes. Let me just start simply with the well-being of the migrants. What is the status today, and have they all chosen to stay in the facilities that have been provided for them, or are some of them leaving?
Sure. So as soon as these immigrants arrived, our island jumped into action, providing people with the beds, the health care, the food, shelter, everything that they needed. We even set up a play area for the children that were shipped here. And we have immigration attorneys who are Spanish speaking, working with everyone on their immigration claims. So right now, everyone is in good shape. Currently, they're housed at a parish in Edgartown. This is only a temporary solution. This is where we have our wintertime homeless shelter. It doesn't have the facilities for the amount of people that are here. So we're working with our state and federal partners on a more permanent solution.
What do you know about their journey? What have you learned from conversations perhaps with these immigration lawyers that are now having conversations? What were they told when they got on this plane?
They were told they were spun a bunch of lies. They were told that they would be met here by people giving them jobs and housing. Some of them were told they were going to New York. Others it appears were told that they were headed towards immigration meetings. And they showed up with absolutely no notice. But this is an island community. This is a state that immediately sprang into action to get these people the resources and help that they need.
What has this incident taught you, or has it taught you anything? And what does it make you think of our national political debate these days?
Well, look, You know, these immigrant families, women, children, are being used as political pawns. The governor of Florida, one of the largest states in the United States, is spending his time not helping the people of Florida and the many issues that need help in Florida, but instead spending his time hatching a secretive plot to send women, children, immigrant families here, also that he can get a couple minutes on Tucker Carlson and Fox News, and you know, bang his chest about being tough on immigration. Right. There is nothing tough about using women and children for your own political gain. Governor Desantis is a coward. He is weak. And you know, what gives me hope here is how quickly this island community rallied, how quickly the state rallied to support these incredibly vulnerable people that are here, coming in to meet every need that they have. That is what makes this country great. That is what makes this community great. And I couldn't be prouder to be from here.
I want to confirm, were all these migrants Venezuelan? Most of them? Do you have a full count?
So there's 48 people who got off the plane. It's my understanding that nearly all of them are Venezuelan, right. but cannot confirm that exactly. Well,
we're going to delve into the fact that these are folks that are escaping socialism, and Governor DeSantis chose not to worry about that. But I am curious, given perhaps I see Ted Cruz is talking about creating a new port of entry in Martha's Vineyard, and my point is this, Representative Fernandez. There are going to be politicians on the right that view this as, oh, this was great. Look at the attention he got. More of this, more fundraising on Fox or whatever it is. Is Martha's Vineyard prepared for more planes?
I mean, look, here's what I can tell you is that we are an immigrant community. We have a vibrant immigrant population here. We always have. 20% of the students in our public schools are English language learners. Over a third of our public schools here are students who are non-white. We have a vibrant immigrant population here. And look, immigration is a federal issue that needs to be solved federally. But what I can tell you is that this is a welcoming community. This is a community that prides itself on the diversity that immigration brings here, and that as long as people here, we're gonna make sure that they are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Now,
these folks are not detained in people. If they choose to leave, they can. Are you gonna, if they would like to go to Florida, for instance, because my guess is many of them, being Venezuelan, they may have a family member or somebody, a friend of a family in there, and that's a place they can find shelter. If they come to you or come to the state and say, hey, we'd like to get down to South Florida, are you guys going to facilitate that transportation?
We're working all of that out right now. I mean, look, this is, not even 24 hours. Next step is dinner, right?
Of course.
For these folks. And then we're working towards a longer term solution for a facility for people here long term. The facilities here are not adequate, but we're working on that really rapidly. We're going through everyone individually with a team of Spanish-speaking immigration attorneys here to work through each person's individual claim, individual case. Right. And then from there, we're going to respond to their needs.
Massachusetts State Representative Dylan Fernandez, when you ran for this office, I'm guessing this is not an issue you expected to be dealing with in your district. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience with us.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, Putin meets Xi face-to-face as an increasingly isolated Kremlin looks for help in Ukraine amid a potential turning point against the Russians in this war. Plus, we're live from the White House, where the president has been hosting a pro-democracy summit amid rising threats of hate crimes and political violence. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi met in Uzbekistan today. It was the first time the two of them have met face-to-face since the start of the war in Ukraine. And for Xi, really, it's the first time he's left China. since COVID. According to a transcript from the Kremlin of some of the opening remarks from the meeting, Putin thanked China for their, quote, balanced position on the war in Ukraine and said he understands Xi's questions and concerns about the situation. China's readout made no explicit mention of Ukraine as they try to maintain their support towards Russia without facing backlash from the West. The meeting comes as Putin becomes increasingly isolated on the global stage. His forces have suffered stunning losses in parts of the northeast and southern Ukraine, and Russia has now turned to Iran and North Korea, two other pariah states, for weaponry. That's how low Putin is running. Putin and Xi last met in early February. That was when Putin went to China before the war, and it was ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Now, in a statement that followed that meeting, the two countries declared a friendship with, quote, no limits. But I'm joined now by retired Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, former Deputy Commander of U.S. European Command and an NBC News military analyst. And I also have Ambassador Mike McFaul. He's a former U.S. Ambassador to Russia and an NBC News International Affairs analyst. Mike, I want to start with you and the specific readout of Putin. This is what you do. You help us decipher Kremlin speak. Balanced approach to Ukraine. When he says that of China, you tell me, how much of that was Putin having to acknowledge that China actually is trying to not help them too much?
Chuck, I thought it was extraordinary. These are not strong statements. If I tell you, hey, Chuck, I have some concerns about your behavior, that doesn't sound very friendly, does it?
No, it doesn't.
And for him then to say balanced, that means, he's acknowledging that Xi Jinping is standing on the sidelines here. Yeah. What he wanted was enthusiastic support. What he wanted is what Zelensky gets when he meets with NATO leaders or European Union leaders. He did not get that in this meeting. And even more so, read the readout that the government of China put out. The word Ukraine does not appear in their readout. That is a blow to Putin.
So, General Twitty, let's take it to the battlefield here. It's hard not to connect China's, I guess, renewed hesitance to back Russia with what we're seeing on the battlefield.
Well, obviously, you do not want to hitch your cart to a runaway horse. And in this case here, this is a losing horse going into battle here. And I don't blame the Chinese not one bit for not supporting. Over the last couple of days, I just read where the Ukrainians have taken now 8,000 kilometers, not just in the east, but also in the south. So that's a tremendous accomplishment by the Ukrainians. And so the Russians are on their heels right now, and Putin needs to figure out how he can regain this momentum. And I'm not so sure that he's going to be able to do that anytime soon.
I was just going to say, General, what is the next window here? I mean, when it comes to winter is coming, it's a phrase we know is familiar to TV fans. But winter will stop this war for a while. What are you watching for over the next 3 months, particularly? How aggressive should the Ukrainians be in these months leading up to the cold?
Well, the first thing is you heard me talk about, again, the 8,000 kilometers. So anytime you take land, you have to figure out how you hold that land. So all the land that's been taken so far, the Ukrainians will have to consolidate those gains, put soldiers there to hold that terrain, because if they don't, the Russians are going to come back in, and then you have another fight on your hands, and perhaps the Russians will take it. And then after you consolidate the gains that they've had, they must continue the momentum. They have the Russians on their back heels, so continue that momentum and continue to defeat them throughout their territory. With winter coming, you can anticipate that the majority of fighting will be regulated to the roads, and will also be regulated with missile strikes and artillery strikes. And I think that's where the Russians will go. We've already started to see that.
Gotcha.
He attacked a missile strike in a dam today in President Zelensky's hometown. I think you're going to see an uptick of that because he has no options at this point. And I think the HIMARS and the drone capability that we put in from the U.S. and so forth will make a difference during the winter months as well.
All right, Mike. So Putin's out here looking for help and support from China, doesn't get it. He sees what's happening on the battlefield as General Twitty is describing it. What is happening in the Kremlin right now, and what is his most realistic next move here?
Well, I want to be clear. I don't know what's happening in the Kremlin because I don't interact with people in the Kremlin. I'm on the sanctions list, haven't been there for 8 years. I used to go there. I don't anymore. But if I had to guess, Chuck, I'd say two things. First of all, there's a blame game going on, and that's spilled out into the public, by the way, even on Russian state television.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be responsible for this. It can't be the good czar, so it has to be the generals or somebody else.
Yeah.
And second, I think they are laying the predicate to try to double down. To try to push back. I don't know if they have the capabilities. I most certainly hope they do not have the capabilities. But I don't think Putin is going to think about what happened in Kherson and this humiliation and say, okay, now it's time to stop fighting. I think he will want to double down if he has the ability to do so.
But what do you make of the criticism coming now from the right? I mean, it's funny you say that. I was listening, and don't judge me, but I was listening to the Paul Feinbaum show, and there were a bunch of Alabama fans refusing to criticize Nick Saban, but he goes, those coordinators are terrible. They've got to fire the coordinators. That sounds like what you're saying, that the right-wing commentators are saying, fire the coordinators, Mr. Putin.
Well, Chuck, we were just saying that after our loss to USC, just so you know, out here at Stanford. But exactly, there's an old tradition. The good czar, the bad boyars. That's a phrase from pre-Soviet times, and that's exactly what's going on. Putin's untouchable. Of course, nobody's going to call for him to resign. There's not going to be a coup, but I would not be surprised to see a shakeup, particularly the Minister of Defense, Mr. Shoigu. I think he's in a lot of trouble right now. He could be the sacrificial lamb for a shakeup of their military operations in Ukraine. And I want to be clear. I hope it does not succeed.
Right.
You didn't ask me what I hope for.
Right.
What I predict is that we're going to see more activity and perhaps some resignations.
General Truddy, react to that assumption there that Mike said of what he expects. You had your expectations there. So what do the Ukrainians need to do then?
Yeah, here's what I will tell you. I think the Ukrainians are in a period of vulnerability right now. You know, I talked about the missile strikes and the artillery strikes and rocket strikes. I think there's going to be an uptick there, but we must not forget about chemical weapons that could come into play and also tactical nukes that can come into play. Putin's back is up against the wall, and he can always pull those as trump cards.
Mike McFaul, I don't know if you noticed the abstainers on the IAEA vote. Very quickly, there were two on there that jumped out at me. Not surprising about China and Russia, of course. But the two that jumped out at me are India and South Africa. And I guess you could throw Vietnam in there because I know it's certainly the West is trying really hard to get those three countries in particular sort of into Western thinking alignment. What say you?
I think this is a big part of this horrible war period that we haven't been paying enough attention to, Chuck.
Yeah.
We have our views. We look at the autocrats getting together at their summit. And I would rather be a Democrat than an autocrat because the Democrats of the Democratic countries have given a lot more to Zelensky than the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has. But in the global South, we are not winning that argument.
Nope.
And we have got to do more to convince the global South that this is a war of imperialism. It's a war of annexation. And we haven't won that argument. And that vote is one more illustration that we haven't won that argument yet.
I'm so glad you put it in the terms of global South. This has been a challenge for us for years, frankly, not just with this issue. Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, Ambassador Mike McFaul, really appreciate your expertise on this story. Thank you. Up next, the mass shootings, the polarizing politics, and this hate-fueled violence. White House is hosting a summit on protecting democracy and public safety amid a dangerous rise of extremism and division. We're going to check in on that after the break.
Need to say clearly and forcefully all forms of hate fueled by violence have no complicity. My dad would say, if you're silent, complicity, we can't remain silent. There's those who say we bring this up, we just divide the country. Bring it up, we silence it instead of remaining silent. For in silence, wounds deepen.
Go at what the White House has dubbed the United We Stand Summit. Philadelphia, where he warned that, quote, MAGA Republicans to democracy. Today's remarks, but let me get more on that from Kelly O'Donnell. I guess bookend the two speeches for me, right? Because I get this sense that they didn't necessarily...
Very much so. This was much more of a where the president using the bully pulpit to talk likes to use, but to speak in terms of what that become violent really does to the nation. He has had as president when he in the first traveled to Atlanta, violent actions and he talked about the holiday season coming and recalling temple shootings, speaking more in terms of what the character of the nation, not so much about definitely a different tone than Philadelphia, definitely not in the, but at the same time very much trying to urge Paul to have everybody in every kind of segment of American life to take action. There are some specific steps that the administration is calling for. The president didn't get into much of that either. It was really more speaking in terms of the heart of the nation, his up and to speak against acts of violence that are kind of thing that brought together people who've been affected personally by it. He was introduced by the mother of Heather Heyer. She, of course, was killed at Charlottesville. The president talked about that being really a decisive point for his own decision to enter the presidential race, as you recall, Chuck.
Absolutely. Kelly O'Donnell at the White House for us on yet another event that is at least on the concerns over extremism in this country. In one other piece of news, by the way, emanating from the White House, they confirmed that President Biden will be meeting tomorrow with the families of Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Those are two of the Americans currently being held hostage in Russia right now. It'll be the first time the president has met with those families in person. The White House says the president wants to let the families know that securing their release remains a top priority for his administration. Up next, same-sex marriage legislation gets delayed till after the midterms. And a flip-flop for the ages in a key Senate race. Panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We got a lot to chew over, so I've got a great panel to chew it over with. Joining me now is USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, Democratic strategist, Adrienne Elrod, and former Republican congressman from Florida, and an NBC News political analyst, Carlos Curbelo. All right. News item I have not touched today, the senators working on same-sex marriage, sort of codifying it into law before it ends up showing up in the courts. Tammy Baldwin, Susan Collins, they announced that they're going to hold this vote after the midterms. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed after the 2010 midterms, Susan Page. So I think they're right. They'll get a lot more votes for it after the midterms. Question I have is, why do you think the Democrats conceded?
Yeah, well, not all the Democrats are happy that they conceded. I mean, because that gave them an issue, right, that would force Republicans to vote on what has become a very popular issue in America, which is support for same-sex marriage, not to mention interracial marriage, a debate we have had and it is settled. But what you really want to do is enact the law and not get the issue, this is the way that you do it.
That, Adrienne, I mean, that does seem as if the decision that was made by leadership, we all know if you can drive a wedge into the other side, you'll do it. But they chose not to on this. Why?
Well, because I think the stakes are too important. I mean, they feel very strongly that they've got to codify this into law because the Supreme Court could very well overturn this. So this is something that I think Democrats and a handful of Republicans who are working on this want to get this right. But I want to also say, Chuck, this shows how out of touch Republicans are. 70% of Americans support marriage equality. This is an issue that we have debated. We thought it was settled law. The fact that this is even... Republicans can't get 10 votes together tells you everything you need to know.
Carlos, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott didn't want to have this vote, did they?
No, this is a problem Republicans have with their base. They want to keep their base united, and even if they take this position that's very popular, it could cost some base erosion, and that's what the focus always is for Republicans. But I will say, Todd, this is also a credit to the advocacy community.
Yeah,
on both
right.
sides, there are a
That's your-
lot of Republicans on the outside that support, gay marriage, support marriage equality, and they have asked these senators, please put politics aside, and the senators are listening.
As Susan put it, like, if you care about the policy, this is a good day.
This is the best way to do it.
Because this is going to get 70 or 80 votes now in the lame duck. Speaking of base politics, the new nominee in New Hampshire Senate is, I think, testing this premise of how important is the base. This is an election denier, Don Bolduc. He sort of was as Trumpy as you could be, trying to be this. Well, anyway, we've got a sort of greatest hits of him, but he is now flipped on the election. Here's the entire evolution of Mr. Bolduc.
I signed a letter with 120 other generals and admirals saying that Trump won the election, and damn it, I stand by my election.
We, live and learn, right? And I've done a lot of research on this, and I've spent the past couple of weeks talking to Granite Staters all over the state from, every party. And I have come to the conclusion, and I want to be definitive on this. The election was not stolen. Was there fraud? Yes. Is that a concern of Granite Staters all over the state? Yes, there is. Is there a responsibility for public servants in elected positions to ensure that our citizens have faith in their voting system? Yes.
Now, what they didn't show you there in that clip, guys, is that Governor Chris Sununu was behind the chair I'm just half kidding. Was this the price of Governor Sununu's endorsement, you think?
Thank God for video, right?
Yeah.
Because the difference between before and after is so incredibly stark. And I wonder if this is, just politically speaking, the smart move, because it's got to alarm the people who actually believe the election was stolen. Those people turned out and voted for him. And does it persuade the people who are upset by election deniers that he is not, at his heart, an election denier? I just don't know if this works, because the flip was so, it's kind of a triple dip flip.
It is absolutely 180. There's no degrees about it.
Honestly, it's hard to believe this is real life. I mean,
It sure
are people going
But he
to
did a
watch
bunch of
that
research.
and say, oh, I guess he changed his mind, now I can trust him? I mean, this exposes the fraud in the Republican Party. And I say it painfully, because it's bad for the party. I think it's bad for the country. But this is what it comes to. People lying either before or now in order to get elected. And let's say this person gets elected. Who's going to trust him on the Hill? I mean,
okay, let me try to be the most positive on that. Is it at least a baby step in the right direction that he realizes, oh, maybe I should tell the truth? Is there any?
I'm not going to give him that. I mean, look, this is
I'm not even really trying to, but it's sort of like, I guess it's better that he finally did change his mind.
This is a page out of the Republican playbook that we've seen time and time again, where they say one thing and then something happens, they say something else. I mean, how many times have we heard Republicans saying, oh, January 6th didn't really happen, or these were just tourists, when we have photographic evidence of exactly what happened on January 6th? This is a tactic they're trying to use in many different topic areas, and it's not working.
Will Trump respond?
That's a question.
Great question.
Yeah. I mean, does he accept that same? You're right. We shall see. All right. Let's end this where I began the show, which is with Governor Desantis. First, Carlos, let's talk local politics very quickly. I know Magazuelans, as Mark Caputo called them, were a thing in 2020, that there was a Venezuelan community that was shifting due to the S word, thanks mostly to Bernie Sanders and AOC, but the use of the S word. Is there any risk here for DeSantis that he looks a little too cruel to Venezuelans?
There is a risk, and not just with Venezuelans, Chuck. There's a great deal of solidarity in South Florida between Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Colombians, and this is a 2024 play. The problem is that there's a 2022 election. Now, there's some upside here for Republicans. They want to remind people that the border is still chaotic, right? The three Republicans need: inflation, immigration, and crime. Those are the three issues they need to highlight before the election. This certainly does the job, but I do think it goes a little too far, especially when you consider that these people were not even in Florida. Florida taxpayer dollars are being used to transport people from Texas to Massachusetts. I do think that there could be somewhat of a backlash here in the Latino community in South Florida, where Republicans have done exceptionally well in recent years.
And the fact is that margin, they can't afford that. Susan, it's not hard for me to be cynical these days. Ron DeSantis has been scared of one issue. He refuses to talk about it. It's abortion. look, this did something today that if you're Mitch McConnell, you're actually kind of pleased about, which is it took Lindsey Graham off the front page for a day in that debacle of earlier this week. And here's Ron DeSantis, like, it's hard not to look at this and say, hey, I know how to change the conversation. Let me try this.
Yeah. Look at Ron DeSantis. He has really positioned himself in a very shrewd way as Trump without the baggage. And I think that is what this is about, and this is what almost everything he does is about.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact that it appears to me the National Democratic Party is not really backing Charlie Crist and not giving Ron DeSantis a campaign that arguably, Carlos is just outlining, one that could provide some pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democratic Party is still standing with Charlie Crist. I just don't know that he's necessarily.
Where's the financial proof?
I don't know that it's a top race for the National Democratic Party. But look, I think going back to this issue, I mean, the thing that I think is hilarious, frankly, is that if you survey the average voter right now, immigration is not even a top 3, top 4 issue. So the fact that the Republicans like Abbott and DeSantis are doing this. It might be a base motivator, but it's something that is turning off a lot of those independent voters and obviously a lot of swing voters. And it's not a tactic that I think is going to work in the midterms. Maybe it's more toward 2024.
Motivates the Republican base, and I think it divides, complicates things for Democrats. I don't think Democrats have had an effective response to, okay, what are you going to do about the border? If the border is under control, how are you going to do it without policies that treat people?
But isn't this the problem the Democrats are in, though? I mean, in Carlos, which is there's only one side that wants to negotiate. There is no evidence that the Republicans want to negotiate on immigration, is there?
We tried hard in 2018, got a discharge petition signed. It was really the only way to kind of force House Republicans to deal with immigration. I get, you know, every once in a while someone comes and say, gee, I wish we would have voted for that bill, but no one wanted to do it. Yeah, I think Democrats a lot of the times want to negotiate up to a point, but without a doubt, Susan, I mean, I think this issue is better for Republicans, so to speak. I mean, very few Americans look at what happens at the border and say, okay, this is working, this is okay.
This, to me, is a trap for your side, Adrienne, which is simply the chaos is terrible and it looks incompetent. At the same time, there's only so much you can do if the law doesn't get changed.
Yeah.
And the fact, and I get that, but there is a point of like disconnect in, for instance, the vice president's answer or other White House officials' answers. Well, we proposed an immigration bill on day one. Yeah, okay, what else have you done?
Well, look, I will say this, though, and I think that the administration needs to keep harping on this. We don't have any cooperation from any Republicans in this Congress right now to get something done on immigration. So, yes, is it something that perhaps this is in the Democrats' court because we have control of the White House and in the Congress? Sure. But we have no one willing on the Republican side to come to the table and try to help us come up with a solution on comprehensive immigration reform.
Greenland and Donald Trump. And I say this because I feel like there's so many of these anecdotes, Susan, where it's like, you know, and I love Peter Baker and Susan Glasser's book here, but it's like, where does that one rank on the list of, oh my God, I'm not surprised, but I'm shocked by that, or I'm not shocked, but I'm surprised by that.
So Trump has created a new category, which is shocking but not surprising.
Yeah, there you go.
So one disclosure after another, it's like, I can't believe a president did that. I cannot believe he did that.
The West Bank to Jordan.
But surprising?
Yeah.
Not really surprising.
Right. Yeah, and is there diminishing returns on the impact of this?
I mean,
with voters or not?
Look, for example, I wasn't shocked because the president once explained to me, showing me the Electoral College map, that he did not cancel NAFTA because the red parts would have gotten angry, and those were the people who supported him. That Secretary Perdue had convinced him that, you know, he shouldn't do it. So I wasn't surprised, and I think it is a problem that we're not shocked or surprised by any of this stuff because it's becoming normal, and it's not.
And I think that's the thing. The normalization then all of a sudden allows Ron DeSantis to think his behavior is normal.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. This is what Trump has done. He has said and done so many crazy, erratic things over the last 6, 7 years, even longer than that, that we now aren't even shocked when we see these things. And you're exactly right. When we are not shocked by that, that is where we do have bigger problems.
The lack of shock
Sure.
is actually a big problem. Susan, Adrienne, Carlos told you we had a lot to chew over today. We chewed a lot of it, so thank you. We also, before I go to break, we have some news out of Jackson, Mississippi. This afternoon, the governor, Tate Reeves, announced that clean water has been restored to the state's capital city after recent testing indicated that the water was finally safe to drink. Following the governor's press conference, the state's health department announced that the boil water notice has been lifted for residents of Jackson. Governor Reeves was cautious, saying that further interruptions are still possible because, frankly, there have been over the last 6 months. But the state will continue to monitor the system. The city has been under a state-issued boil water advisory since July. Still to come, Christian nationalism and the fight between church and state. The gripping story behind tonight's Season 5 opener of the Meet the Press Reports series after a quick break. Welcome back. Theocracy. It's not a word you hear often in American politics. In fact, in some ways, we sort of usually refrain from it. But it seems more and more the idea may not be as far-fetched as it used to be, given the rhetoric coming from some newer-ish Republican figures. From the halls of Congress to the campaign trail, the idea of separation between church and state does not seem to be a given anymore, particularly with this new breed of Republican officeholder. In the town of Moscow, Idaho, the fight between church and state is taking a new turn. Residents of this mostly liberal college town are at odds with the pastor of Christ Church, whose mission is to make, quote, Moscow a Christian town. So what does this mean? Well, some basic tenets include the complete submission of women and an unquestioning obedience to authority. My colleague Ann Thompson sat down with the leader of Moscow's Christ Church to learn more.
From this former art house movie theater, Wilson leads his campaign to make Moscow a Christian town.
Idaho is a very red state. Moscow was historically a very blue dot in this red state. And so consequently, the fact that we've done this has been disruptive in the minds of some, but the feasibility of evangelizing in Moscow had to do with the importance of the university and the size of the town.
So in your version of a Christian town, would there be a place for non-believers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Would there be a place for same-sex couples?
But you mean legally?
Yes.
You mean like marriage?
Mm-hmm.
No marriage. But there'd be same-sex couples.
No marriage, even though it's the law of the land in the United States?
Just like Roe used to be, right? In my belief system, in our doctrinal stand, and what we believe the Bible teaches, homosexuality is not only a choice, but a sinful one. Yes.
All right, joining me now is Ann Thompson. And Ann, the whole point we were doing here is that there does seem to be, the question is, there's a growing movement. And I guess the question is it a loud movement or a truly growing movement? And I guess what would you describe it as?
I would say, at least in Moscow, it is largely a loud movement. Doug Wilson knows how to get a lot of attention, but he's kind of hit a critical mass as far as his influence throughout the town. He has about 2,000 attendees out of a city that is 25,000. So is he going to take over the city? That doesn't seem possible. They've run 2 candidates for city council. Both were soundly defeated. So he's got a choice. Either he brings people in or he just continues to make more noise.
You did a terrific piece about sort of the competing worlds of evangelical Christians back in the state of Tennessee. And we were talking about Trump churches at the time. What is the what are the similarities between what Pastor Wilson is trying to do, and what are the differences between what you saw there in Tennessee?
The biggest difference, Chuck, is that politics is not practiced in Doug Wilson's church.
Oh, interesting.
In a blatant kind of way, the way it is in the Patriot Church of Ken Peters. There's no American flag on Doug Wilson's stage. He does not stand there and tell people vote for Trump. But the values are the same. These are anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, people who are very concerned about gender identity, people who feel that something is being taken away from them. And that's why they want this return to, as they say,
and very patriarchal,
the Christian roots.
Right?
Yes, very, very patriarchal.
Yeah, that seemed to be a huge description there. You do these stories for us. They're tremendous. This one is also. So thank you. You can catch more of Ann's reporting on tonight's Season 5 season premiere of Meet the Press Reports. Watch it tonight at 10:30 Eastern right here on NBC News Now, and it's available on demand tomorrow on Peacock. NBC News Now coverage will continue with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.